War compresses invention into urgency. Machines meant for comfort are reborn for survival. Picture the rumble of an engine not on a Sunday highway, but through fields torn by artillery. A vehicle once built for leisure now serving as lifeline and scout. Mud clings to its tires, cold bites at its metal, yet it presses on mile after unforgiving mile. It isn't just a tool. It's a testament to what happens when engineering meets necessity under fire. Across continents and climates, one machine defined the idea of mobility in the chaos of World War II, proving that reliability could be as decisive as bravery. This is the story of how a motorcycle became a soldier's companion, a courier's steed, and later a symbol of freedom itself. The road we're about to ride begins in wartime factories and ends on the open highways of peace, where legacy outlives conflict. Stick around, hit like and subscribe, and tell us in the comments what machine you want us to uncover next. The Harley-Davidson WL 1942 was never meant to win beauty contests. It was meant to win wars. When the United States entered World War II, Harley-Davidson faced a moment of reckoning. Civilian production halted almost overnight as the company turned its Milwaukee assembly lines into a wartime operation. The WL, previously a civilian side valve motorcycle, became the foundation for the military-spec WLA, the A signifying Army. Engineers stripped away luxury and comfort, replacing chrome with matte olive drab, swapping road manners for battlefield endurance. What rolled off those lines wasn't just a motorcycle, it was an all-terrain statement of purpose. The WL 1942 embodied the philosophy that form must follow function. Its 45 cubic inch flathead V-twin engine wasn't the most powerful, but it was nearly indestructible. Soldiers could repair it in mud or snow with a basic toolkit, a feature that no one romanticized but everyone relied on. The Springer front fork soaked up brutal terrain while maintaining balance. Foot clutch and hand shift mechanisms remained stubbornly mechanical, ideal for a machine that couldn't depend on fragility. The weight, about 550 pounds, made it stable, though not nimble, and its top speed of around 65 mph was plenty for wartime missions. Behind its creation was a company deeply intertwined with America's industrial identity. Harley-Davidson understood that success in war wasn't about innovation for its own sake, but about adaptability. How fast could they turn an American symbol of freedom into a disciplined instrument of logistics and reconnaissance? The WL 1942 was the answer, not because it was revolutionary, but because it was relentlessly dependable. The design brief was as blunt as the reality. Build something that survives even when its rider might not. Harley's engineers worked closely with the U.S. Army to fine-tune every aspect of the WL 1942. Air filters were enlarged to handle desert dust. Electrical systems were shielded against moisture. Oil lines were simplified. They learned from earlier prototypes that had failed under North African heat or Russian cold. The result was a motorcycle that could start under almost any condition. When thousands of WLs were crated and shipped overseas, they became the connective tissue of Allied logistics, delivering mail, messages, and morale. What made the WL's design genius wasn't speed or sophistication, it was empathy. Harley engineers imagined the rider in impossible conditions and built around that picture. Every bolt, cable, and hose had to tell a story of endurance. There's a certain humility in that kind of engineering, creating something to serve rather than to shine. Still, the WL 1942 wasn't immune to challenges. The machine's low ground clearance made it a target for debris and rough terrain, and its weight could be punishing during recovery missions. Yet those same traits lent it remarkable stability and control when loaded with gear or towing a small trailer. Soldiers quickly developed a relationship with the bike that bordered on reverence. It was often said that the WL would run on anything, and in a world where gasoline quality was inconsistent at best, that wasn't exaggeration. It was survival. Life on the front with a WL 1942 wasn't glamorous. Mud caked every moving part. Maintenance was constant, and the roar of the flathead engine became background noise to fear and fatigue. But the motorcycle carried messages that shaped battles, delivered supplies that sustained lives, and gave soldiers a rare sense of motion in a world stuck between chaos and waiting. In quiet moments, when the engine cooled and the night fell, that same rumble connected riders to home, one mechanical heartbeat linking Milwaukee steel to foreign soil. For Harley-Davidson, this period wasn't just a business pivot, it was existential. The company's survival depended on its ability to serve the war effort effectively. Competing manufacturers also built military bikes, but few matched Harley's production volume or reliability record. The WL 1942 became synonymous with dependability, earning the nickname Liberator in some Allied circles. And for Harley's workforce, many of whom were women stepping into industrial roles for the first time, it was a point of pride. Every wrench turned in Milwaukee was a quiet contribution to victory abroad. Yet even in the shadow of war, Harley-Davidson never lost sight of its post-war identity. Engineers took notes, quietly cataloging which features worked and which didn't. They understood that once the fighting ended, America would hunger for motion again, for the freedom of the open road. The WL 1942 would become a bridge between those worlds, a soldier's workhorse transformed into a civilian dream. That's the paradox at the heart of the WL 1942. It was built for control, yet it inspired rebellion. In its bones lay the DNA of both discipline and defiance. The same metal that endured mud and shrapnel would later roar across American highways as the soundtrack to a new generation's search for identity. The WL was never designed for that destiny, but it made it possible. This machine didn't just carry troops, it carried an idea. And as we move deeper into its story, we'll see how this war-forged motorcycle went from government issue to cultural icon, shaping the way the world saw American engineering and American spirit. In the next segment, we'll trace how the Harley-Davidson WL 1942 fared on the battlefield, how it earned its legend, and how it held its ground against rivals that were faster, lighter, and far more advanced on paper. The Harley-Davidson WL 1942 met its true test not on the assembly line, but on the battlefield. As Allied forces advanced across North Africa, Europe, and the Pacific, the WL became a constant presence, its flathead V-twin echoing through deserts, forests, and bombed-out towns. Soldiers depended on it for communication, reconnaissance, and morale, and the motorcycle delivered with quiet heroism. The WL 1942 proved that mechanical reliability could be as vital as tactical brilliance. It wasn't glamorous, but it was indispensable. On the front lines, the Harley-Davidson WL 1942 stood shoulder to shoulder with jeeps and trucks as part of a mobile network that made the Allied war machine fluid and responsive. In an age before digital communication, messages had to move fast but discreetly, and the WL provided that speed in a compact, adaptable form. Riders could weave through tight terrain where larger vehicles bogged down, and the bike's torquey, low-speed handling made it ideal for narrow roads or rubble-strewn villages. Its simple ignition system meant fewer points of failure, while its exposed mechanics allowed field repairs without specialized tools. It was, in every sense, a soldier's machine. Yet the WL 1942 didn't go unchallenged. Rival manufacturers in Europe, notably those producing lighter, shaft-driven models, presented alternatives that excelled in specific theaters. Some were faster, others more maneuverable, but the WL's advantage was universal serviceability. Spare parts were plentiful thanks to Harley-Davidson's massive production runs, and that ubiquity became its armor. In war, logistics often outweigh innovation, and the WL was proof. 1,000 bikes that can be repaired anywhere are worth more than 100 that perform brilliantly until they break. The WL 1942 also played an unexpected psychological role. To many American soldiers, it was a piece of home on foreign soil, a reminder of the roads they left behind. Photographs from the era show troops posing proudly beside their machines, sometimes painting nicknames or personal insignias on the tanks. The motorcycle became a morale anchor, a bit of individuality in a world of uniformity. When troops liberated towns, the sight and sound of the WL often preceded the flag. That combination of motion and symbolism etched the bike into memory. As the war dragged on, Harley-Davidson continuously refined the WL 1942. Dust-proof carburetors, blackout lights, and improved air filtration kept it relevant through shifting battle conditions. By 1945, over 90,000 units had been produced, serving not only in the U.S. Army, but also among Allied forces through the Lend-Lease program. In Soviet hands, the WL proved equally durable, braving frozen supply lines and cratered landscapes. Wherever it went, it carried the same reputation: unyielding, repairable, trustworthy. The WL 1942 also found itself in specialized roles. In Europe, it served as a courier bike for dispatch riders navigating enemy fire. In North Africa, it became a reconnaissance tool for tracking movements across open dunes. Some were fitted with rifle scabbards or radio equipment, extending their utility. Each adaptation told a story of necessity, the kind of wartime improvisation that transformed factory-standard machines into battlefield legends. And while the motorcycle's performance was modest by peacetime standards, in combat, its predictability was priceless. After the victory celebrations, the world was littered with surplus WL 1942 units. Many were sold off cheaply, shipped home, or abandoned in depots. That flood of availability sparked something unexpected. Young veterans returning from service recognized the bike instantly. It was familiar, rugged, and within reach. They bought them, stripped off the military hardware, and began customizing. Without realizing it, these veterans were planting the seeds of what would become the American custom motorcycle scene. The WL 1942, a tool of war, was reborn as an instrument of self-expression. Meanwhile, the market itself began to shift. Civilian buyers, tired of pre-war luxury and eager for post-war practicality, saw in the WL's design a kind of honesty. It wasn't sleek or refined, but it was proven. Rival manufacturers introduced newer models with overhead valves, telescopic forks, and modern styling. But the WL's side valve reliability still appealed to a generation rebuilding from scarcity. Its maintenance simplicity, anyone with a wrench and a manual could keep it running, became its selling point. In the US, Harley-Davidson leveraged its wartime credibility. The company proudly advertised its role in the Allied victory, positioning the WL's lineage as the backbone of its identity. Every new motorcycle that rolled out of Milwaukee in the late 1940s carried echoes of the WL 1942's toughness. This wasn't nostalgia, it was branding rooted in earned respect. The war had made Harley-Davidson more than a manufacturer. It had made it a symbol. Abroad, the WL 1942 left behind a mechanical diaspora. In Europe and Asia, surplus units became police bikes, delivery vehicles, or taxis. In some regions, they served for decades after the war, outlasting their riders. Mechanics cannibalized parts, swapped engines, and created hybrids, ensuring that the WL's DNA survived even where the Harley name faded. You can still find remnants in barns and garages, bikes rebuilt 3 or 4 times, their origins barely traceable, but their frames unmistakably WL. The Harley-Davidson WL 1942 also taught valuable lessons to engineers worldwide. It demonstrated that the best design doesn't always mean the most advanced. It means the most adaptable. That idea reshaped motorcycle development for decades. Whether in Japan, Britain, or Germany, post-war designs often sought to capture what the WL embodied: balance, serviceability, and endurance. For the American motorcycle community, however, the WL 1942 became something more personal. Clubs formed around surplus bikes, and with them came a culture of brotherhood and rebellion. Riders customized frames, chopped fenders, swapped handlebars, and reimagined the WL's silhouette. The machine that once symbolized duty now represented defiance. Its war-born utility had transformed into peacetime individuality. Through the 1950s and 60s, as newer Harleys appeared, the WL 1942 remained a touchstone, a reminder that toughness and simplicity could coexist with beauty. Collectors and restorers still seek original military WLs, complete with olive paint and canvas saddlebags. Each restored bike is a time capsule, carrying traces of dust from both battlefields and back roads. The WL's cultural afterlife was unplanned but profound. It linked generations, soldiers who rode for survival and civilians who rode for identity. Its journey from war to freedom mirrored America's own transition from the industrial urgency of the 1940s to the expressive individualism of the mid-century. And yet, underneath it all, the same mechanical heartbeat endured, that steady, deliberate rhythm of the flathead V-twin. The WL 1942 story doesn't just live in museums or parades, it hums in every Harley that followed. The lessons of endurance, utility, and soul have been carried forward through decades of design. But before we reach that legacy, we need to ask, what happens when a machine outlives its moment? In the next segment, we'll explore how the Harley-Davidson WL 1942 evolved from a wartime necessity into a peacetime legend, and what its enduring presence tells us about the bond between man, machine, and memory. The Harley-Davidson WL 1942 entered peacetime as both survivor and symbol. With the war over, Harley's factories returned to civilian production, but the influence of the WL lingered in every corner of the design studio. Engineers who had built the WL under wartime constraints now faced a new challenge: transforming a utilitarian workhorse into an aspirational motorcycle for a country hungry for freedom. The WL 1942 itself, in surplus and in spirit, became the bridge between those worlds. Veterans came home with memories of the Harley-Davidson WL 1942, how it started in freezing dawns, carried them through mud, and brought them closer to home, even in foreign lands. Many of those same veterans sought out WLs or their civilian siblings, the WLC and WLD, turning them into the foundation of early American motorcycling culture. That connection was emotional before it was mechanical. The same machine that once served the military's mission of order now served a personal mission of escape. In garages across post-war America, the WL 1942 underwent a transformation as dramatic as the country itself. Its olive drab tanks were stripped and repainted with flames, pinstripes, or chrome. Military racks and blackout lights gave way to bobbed fenders and polished aluminum. The bobber movement was born here, veterans cutting weight and customizing to reclaim individuality in a conformist decade. The WL's flathead engine, simple and forgiving, was perfect for experimentation. If a carburetor fouled or a valve stuck, a rider could fix it with little more than grit and a borrowed wrench. This wasn't just mechanics, it was therapy, a ritual of taking something shaped by war and giving it new life. The Harley-Davidson WL 1942 also helped define a design language that still echoes through Harley's lineup. Its low stance, visible mechanicals, and signature V-twin silhouette became aesthetic hallmarks. The side valve motor, though later replaced by more efficient overhead valve designs, embodied the balance between simplicity and dependability that Harley's brand would come to represent. Even as the company introduced models like the Panhead and the Sportster, the WL's DNA remained visible, an unspoken promise of rugged honesty. Collectors and historians often describe the WL 1942 as a transitional artifact, but that undersells its impact. It wasn't just a relic of war. It was a foundation stone for Harley-Davidson's mythology. Without it, there would be no seamless narrative from battlefield to back road, no image of the lone rider chasing the horizon. The WL 1942 gave Harley the credibility to claim authenticity, earned in mud, not marketing. As decades passed, the WL 1942 acquired a second life overseas. In Europe, particularly in Eastern Bloc nations, leftover WLs became prized possessions. Mechanics adapted them with local parts, keeping them alive long past their intended service. In some towns, these bikes became heirlooms, passed from father to son, their engines rebuilt again and again. To this day, the sound of that flathead rumble can still be heard in corners of Poland, France, and Italy, where restorers preserve not just the machines, but the stories tied to them. For collectors in the US, the WL 1942 represents a perfect balance of history and accessibility. It's old enough to feel sacred, yet simple enough to maintain without exotic expertise. Finding one in original military trim, complete with stamped numbers and canvas saddlebags, is like finding a time capsule of American ingenuity. Prices have climbed as authenticity becomes rarer, but the bike's charm isn't in exclusivity, it's in its honesty. There's something grounding about a machine built for the harshest conditions, still capable of firing up with a few kicks and a spark. The Harley-Davidson WL 1942 also reminds us that technology alone doesn't create legend. Context does. Many motorcycles have come and gone with better power, handling, or design, but few carry the moral weight of the WL's story. It was forged in necessity, refined in hardship, and reborn in freedom. That trinity, necessity, hardship, freedom, still defines the emotional core of the Harley brand. It's why the company's wartime slogan, "We'll keep 'em rolling," resonates even now. Modern Harley-Davidsons, whether touring machines or stripped-down cruisers, trace their lineage to the WL 1942's philosophy. Reliability first, style second, identity always. Even Harley's shift toward modern materials and electronics doesn't erase that legacy, it builds upon it. The engineering lessons learned from the WL's simplicity have guided decades of product development. And in an age where many motorcycles chase speed or technology, the WL stands as a reminder that character can't be coded. For enthusiasts, restoring or riding a Harley-Davidson WL 1942 today isn't about nostalgia. It's about connection. Every scratch in its paint, every click of its Kickstarter, carries the resonance of history. You're not just riding a motorcycle. You're participating in a lineage of endurance and expression. Some call it mechanical empathy, the feeling that this machine has seen more, survived more, and still chooses to move forward. That's why the WL's story endures. It transcends specifications and enters the realm of myth. When a rider starts one today, that steady thump-thump of the flathead isn't just combustion, it's continuity. It's a mechanical echo of everything Harley-Davidson learned in 1942 about resilience and everything riders still seek today. Motion with meaning. And that's the true legacy of the Harley-Davidson WL 1942. It wasn't built to be timeless, but it became timeless by accident, through sheer function, faith, and fortitude. Its journey from battlefield grit to cultural grace tells us something profound about machines and people alike. Both are capable of transformation, but only when tested. The story of the Harley-Davidson WL 1942 closes not with an ending, but with an inheritance. It left behind a blueprint of endurance, adaptability, and purpose that every Harley since has followed. And as long as there are roads and riders who crave connection over perfection, the WL spirit will keep rolling. In the final segment, we'll sum up what this legacy means for collectors, riders, and dreamers today, and what it truly takes to keep a 70-year-old warhorse alive and kicking in the modern age. Owning or even encountering a Harley-Davidson WL 1942 today feels like shaking hands with history. For collectors, it's more than a vintage motorcycle. It's a living artifact that bridges the world of industrial war production and post-war American identity. The WL 1942's enduring appeal lies in how straightforward it remains. Unlike later Harleys with complex electrics or bulky fairings, the WL is elemental: steel, oil, and muscle. That purity keeps it relevant for restorers and riders who value connection over convenience. Within the first few minutes of riding a Harley-Davidson WL 1942, its lineage becomes clear. The engine's low compression makes for a slow, deliberate rhythm, the kind that teaches patience rather than demands speed. It's not a bike for adrenaline, it's a bike for awareness. Every vibration reminds you that this machine was built by human hands for human hands, long before automation or digital controls. Riding one is less about performance and more about participation in something enduring. For US enthusiasts seeking to buy or restore a WL 1942, the market remains surprisingly active. Original military units, especially those with matching engine and frame numbers, can command significant prices, often between $20,000 and $40,000 depending on condition and authenticity. Civilian converted WLs are more affordable, and parts remain accessible through a dedicated network of specialists who keep the flathead lineage alive. Reliability, when properly maintained, is better than expected. The side valve engine, though simple, is remarkably forgiving. Oil changes, regular lubrication, and valve checks are enough to keep it running indefinitely. Even 70 years later, it's a motorcycle that prefers commitment to complication. What makes the Harley-Davidson WL 1942 so emotionally durable is how it redefines the relationship between rider and machine. There's humility in riding something slower, heavier, and older, but also a deep sense of satisfaction. You feel its heartbeat through the seat, the levers, and the frame. The same qualities that made it dependable in war make it grounding in peace. It's not a trophy bike. It's a companion with stories etched into every surface. For US riders, there's also a broader symbolism. The WL 1942 represents an era when American manufacturing was both muscle and mission. It stands as proof that innovation isn't always about progress, it's about purpose. In an age of instant gratification, the WL reminds us of patience, of earned mastery, of mechanical truth. And in that sense, it connects directly to modern Harley riders who still value heritage over hype. The legacy of the Harley-Davidson WL 1942 continues not because of nostalgia, but because it answers a question that technology often forgets to ask. What does it mean to endure? This motorcycle's story shows that design excellence comes from empathy, understanding the people who depend on the machine, not just those who admire it. That lesson is timeless, and it's one the WL continues to teach with every mile. So whether it's restored for shows, ridden on quiet country roads, or displayed in museums, the Harley-Davidson WL 1942 holds its place as a cornerstone of American motorcycling. It reminds us that freedom sometimes begins with duty, that simplicity can outlast sophistication, and that real legends don't fade, they evolve. In the end, this isn't just the story of a motorcycle. It's the story of resilience made tangible, of motion as memory, of a machine that carried soldiers through war and riders through generations. The Harley-Davidson WL 1942 is proof that even a tool of conflict can become a symbol of peace, and that every turn of its wheels still whispers the same promise it did more than 80 years ago. Keep rolling, no matter what the road brings.